We might soon be getting a glimpse at the affidavit the Department of Justice filed in order to obtain a warrant to search Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. The affidavit contains specific details about what the Justice Department knows and how they obtained that information. It's a roadmap of sorts, revealing how the investigation has been constructed by the government. On Thursday, during a highly anticipated hearing, the DOJ argued aggressively against a motion to fully unseal the affidavit that was filed by a number of news organizations, including NBC News. Lawyers for the Justice Department said that the release of the affidavit could jeopardize its investigation into Donald Trump's handling of highly classified information, an investigation that is still, in their words, in its early stages. Jay Bratt, a top counterintelligence and national security official at DOJ, argued before the judge that the affidavit needed to be kept completely under wraps due to the substantial grand jury information it contains in what he called a unique case with national security overtones. Bratt went on to say that the federal government was also very concerned about the safety of witnesses and worried that their identities could be pieced together if the document became unsealed. But the magistrate judge did not agree with the Justice Department. He said that upon an initial review, portions might be unsealed. He gave the DOJ 7 days until August 25th to come up with proposed redactions. This all comes nearly a week after the court, per the Justice Department's motion, unsealed the Mar-a-Lago search warrant, where we learned that federal agents recovered boxes of classified documents, some of which are top secret, and that the FBI is investigating former President Donald Trump for removal or destruction of records, obstruction of justice, and violating the Espionage Act. If the affidavit were to become unsealed, even partially, we could learn even more about how this investigation started, where it stands now, and where it might be going next. Joining me now is my friend and brilliant legal mind, Joyce Vance. She's a former federal prosecutor, a law professor at the University of Alabama, and an MSNBC legal analyst. Joyce, thanks for joining me, as always. Couldn't think of anybody better to just kind of sit back and take a deep dive into what's going on. There's news after news after news, but you and I both know, as former prosecutors, there's process. So let's talk about that in depth. The magistrate judge, Bruce Reinhart, he's given the DOJ until August 25th to come up with its proposed redactions to the affidavit. Walk us through what happens during that in-camera or in-chambers review by Judge Reinhart. What are the possible outcomes as well?
Well, the judge told us yesterday what one of the possible outcomes is. It's that he'll look at the possible redactions and be persuaded by DOJ that very little of this information can be released. And so there might be a redacted document released that's mostly a black page with just a word showing here or there. DOJ makes this really compelling argument, and it's a very realistic one. They acknowledge that there's an enormous public interest in this issue, but that has to be balanced against the need for integrity in the investigation, also the need to protect witnesses, classified information, and information obtained through the grand jury. And that's going to be most of what's in this affidavit. So ultimately, even though this reduction process will proceed, it's extremely unlikely that much will become public. With one exception, Katie, it seems to me that it would be possible to redact information about DOJ's efforts to negotiate with Trump World for release of these documents or for reclamation of these documents from Mar-a-Lago. So we may get some of the story there, and that may explain why the former president didn't join the news organizations in asking for unsealing. That certainly won't be a favorable tale for him.
So, Joyce, let's talk about what happens if the federal government ultimately doesn't agree with the magistrate judge, Bruce Reinhart's decision on August 25th, assuming, arguendo, Bruce Reinhart even reaches a decision on the 25th, because the way it's going to roll out is the DOJ is going to present a proposed redacted affidavit. But if the judge decides, you know what, I want to do more redactions, what can the DOJ do for recourse?
Well, exactly. The judge, there'll be this negotiated process of redactions going on in camera. That means without anyone other than the judge and DOJ being aware of it. And ultimately, if DOJ disagrees with where the judge lands, they have the ability to ask a district court judge to review his decision. There's always that inherent right when you're dealing with magistrate judges who aren't presidentially appointed and Senate confirmed. They are appointed by the district court that they serve on, and they perform an enormously valuable function, but their decisions can be reviewed by the presidentially appointed, Senate confirmed Article 3 district judges. And if DOJ were to get an adverse ruling from a district judge, they could still appeal into the 11th Circuit and on into the Supreme Court. Katie, I think it's worth pointing out both you and I practice in the 11th Circuit. It's very conservative. The existing law in the circuit is very pro-government when it comes to protecting the integrity of these investigations. And so the notion here that the circuit court would countenance the release of significant portions of an affidavit over DOJ's objections seems to me to be very unlikely. I know a lot of people are interested and love the magistrate judge's ruling, are looking forward to reading the affidavit. I want to pump the brakes a little bit here and say, even if it's released, that's going to be a lengthy process, maybe a year or more down the road. And it's unlikely that much, if any, of this affidavit becomes public up until the point where charges are filed in this case.
And I appreciate you managing expectations, because that's also something that lawyers do with clients. So I want to highlight something that I think is a huge tell, in my opinion, on the part of Donald Trump. Despite the Trump world's public calls to unseal the affidavit in its entirety, their screams for transparency in their protection and defense of Donald Trump, they have failed to move to intervene, and they have yet to file anything regarding the validity of the search itself. Is this, Joyce, what we would call the proverbial you get what you pay for when it comes to Trump's legal defense at this time?
Yeah, I think this is having your cake and eating it, too, because Trump can use these protestations about DOJ operating in secret to raise money. They're sending out multiple fundraising emails a day, bringing the faithful back to line the coiffers of the campaign or perhaps not of the campaign, because one never knows where that money goes. But, ultimately, the reason we don't see them in court, I think, has less to do with the quality of lawyering and more to do with understanding that there's nothing in this affidavit that's good for Trump when it's released, because this is the probable cause that got the government inside of Mar-a-Lago. This is the government's case against Trump, not to put too fine of a point on it. I think he'll be the happiest person around if there are increasing delays on release of the affidavit.
So the excuses from Trump and his allies have been changing by the day. Let's take a quick listen to Rudy Giuliani on Newsmax last night with one of the newest excuses.
They want to make him responsible for having taken classified documents and preserved them. Really, if you look at the Espionage Act, it's not really about taking the documents. It's about destroying them or hiding them or giving them to the enemy.
Right.
It's not about taking them and putting them in a place that's roughly as safe as they were in the first place.
Putting aside the tortured interpretation of the Espionage Act by Rudy Giuliani, Joyce, first, Trump allies were saying that there was a, quote, standing order to declassify documents. Now here's Rudy saying that Donald Trump was merely preserving classified documents in a, quote, safe place. What do you make of Trump world's ever-evolving but always illogical defenses?
Yeah, this is the slowest rolling confession that I've ever seen, because that's what is happening here. Trump has acknowledged that he took classified documents, top secret SCI documents out of his SCIF, violation. Took stuff to the residence, violation, because everyone knows this notion that he had a standing order isn't true. Took documents from the White House down to Mar-a-Lago, another violation. Lied and told the government that he'd turned everything back over, another violation. So he just confesses to more and more criminal conduct as time goes on.
Joyce Vance, stay right where you are. We are spoiled to get to have you for another block, because coming up next, we're going to talk about the investigation in Georgia.